Okay. Well, anyway, if we haven't met, which a lot of you guys I haven't met yet, my name's Toby Milroy. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for NATMA. I don't like to talk about myself, but one of my staff put this together just as a little outline. But I think you know, I always kind of was thinking about today and what I could contribute, and you know, normally it's a very short period of time, right? So I have like 3 slides, so hopefully that'll be enough. But actually, Master Winkle had to be in another room, so if you were waiting with bated breath to hear from him, you might go try to track him down. But I kind of come from a little bit of a different perspective than a lot of your folks do. Most of the clients that I work with at NATMA, we have about 1,000 members. I have about 200 or so schools that I work with on a very deep one-on-one basis, right? Where they're, you know, I'm deep into their business, you know what I mean? I've got stats every week, and I'm doing staff training with them, and you know, things like that. And so what I think is interesting, what might be valuable for some of you guys, is a very small percentage of my clients actually do after school. Most of them don't. Most of them are just traditional schools, right? I think in the Inner Circle group, if I think about it, I think we only have like 2 people in our high-level coaching group, which is everybody who's over $500,000 a year. There's only like 2 of them in there that actually do after school. One's Paul Miller. You guys know him. It's like a $5 million a year operation. And then another one is in Massachusetts, and he's about a $2 million a year operation. But that's it. I mean, mostly they're just traditional lessons. So maybe I can, you know, be useful there. And these are just, I don't know what this is all about. I guess I was supposed to talk at the same time. So a lot of stuff that I'm gonna, I think, cover today just revolves around traditional martial arts lessons, acquiring new customers. You know, I see 3 big breaks in the industry, 3 big thresholds that schools get to, and most schools have somewhere between an 18 and a 24-month maturation cycle. You know what I mean? When a new school opens, they typically open in an area where there's not a lot of market saturation, usually, and they have the new location boom of new students, right? And that typically wanes somewhere around 12 to 18 months or so. And they land on a plateau that they will, I promise you, stay on until or unless they did something dramatically different than what got them there. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So what happens is after the newness of the new location wears off, you're left with the school owner's ability to attract new customers, right? Minus attrition. And if that's the bottleneck, most school operators, if I looked at like the broad swath of who I work with, you know, they can do maybe 12, 15, 18, 20 enrollments a month, right? Well, that's your limiting factor. That's going to put you on the plateau, and you're going to stay there, right? If that becomes the bottleneck. So what I typically see is there's typically a big break around 22, 24,000 a month and below. Then there's another big plateau around 40,000 a month. And then we have a lot of clients that they hit like a $70,000 a month plateau too. And again, that's mostly just traditional. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But today's focus was just, if you're under $250 a year, if you're under $20,000 a month, Master Kim asked me the direct question, what's the one biggest thing that I could help with that could help people get over that hump, right? And I really had to think about it. One thing, I mean, geez, how do you do that, right? I mean, the stuff that, you know, we really help our people with marketing, with sales, and with, you know, all sorts of different operational components. But if I had to pick the one biggest factor, what would it be, right? So that's what I did. So hopefully that will be of some value to you today, right? So, and I always believe in over-delivery. So we believe in the principle of a 5 times principle. So I always believe every $1 in tuition we charge, we should be delivering $5 in value at a minimum. So I've got a package of material I'd be happy to send everybody, that gray form I gave you. If you want to fill that out, I'll ship that out directly to your school. There's like, I'm not trying to sell you anything, you know, like seriously. It's just, I wanted to be able to over-deliver. So I have a couple of DVDs and a book, Stephen's last book, Everything I Wish I Knew When I Was 22. I have a couple of marketing reports that I've done over the last 6 or 7 months, especially on internet. So if you just fill that out before we go today, I'll grab them, and I'll be happy to send all that stuff out to you, okay? So, so when I was thinking about how we should talk about this kind of big factor, this kind of key fundamental of how to get through this plateau, there are a couple of different ways we can approach this. And I'll leave it up to you. So you get a vote, and I'll just switch the PowerPoints around. So option A is I can be like the teddy bear and be friendly and pat you on the top of the head and tell you everything's going to be okay, and you know there's nothing in the world you have to work on. Just keep working hard and everything will be all right. Or See, without a screen, my joke loses all of its impact, right?
Oh, goodness.
Or we can just talk like, we can tell it how it is, right? And I tend to prefer the second. Does anybody have any votes for the first option? Or okay, good. We'll continue on and pretty much be pretty direct then. So we all know this student, right? You're going to have to go with me on a little journey here, okay? We're going to have a little narrative here that hopefully will lead you the path I want you to follow. But we all have these students, right? We've all had students who, before they came into the martial arts school, really struggled in life, right? They had focus issues, they had self-discipline issues, they had challenges with, you name it, right? We all have those students. And then we get them in our martial arts schools and something happens, right? I can't say that we can fix everybody, but we've all had this experience where we've had that kid, we've had those kids, and 9 months later, a year later, 3 years later, they're like rock stars, right? They're pillars in their community, if you wanted to define it that way, right? We've made incredible improvements in their self-esteem and incredible advancements in their self-confidence, right? We've all had that experience, right?
Sure.
Well, so why is that? How can we do that? We're not all, not everybody's a PhD in educational psychology, right? Like, we don't all have advanced degrees in early childhood development, right? So how are we able to accomplish that on a pretty predictable basis, right? I mean, we do this a lot, don't we? I mean, this isn't like the exception. We get a lot of these, right? So I would argue that there are four fundamental keys. There are four fundamental things that we do, and we do them subconsciously in many cases. But there are four things that we do in our schools that I think create that kind of transformational growth, right? So number one, I think, is that we've interrupted their pattern, right? You guys all do a little NLP, like Tony Robbins stuff, right?
Yes.
So in engaging any kind of change, character change, any kind of behavioral change, the first thing we have to do is stop what the hell they're doing right now anyway, right? Doesn't matter what it is, just stop it, right? So the first thing we do is we dramatically change their environment, right? They're used to what they're doing. They go to school, they go home. Bless you. Their social environment is how it is right now. And part of the result of that social environment is the behavior that we're seeing, right? So the first thing we do is we shake that up. We interrupt their pattern of behavior by putting them into a different environment. Schools look different than every place else they go, right? They feel different. It's a different environment. Second, and this is still under pattern interrupt, we change their peer group, right? When they're in elementary school and the fourth grade teacher is overwhelmed because they have 20 however many kids in the class and doesn't have the ability to manage behavior very well, that becomes their peer group, right? So we change that too, don't we? We put them into a classroom where they're surrounded by other people who are kind of marching in the same direction, right? They're more disciplined. Well, through our leadership, they're more disciplined, right? They're more focused. So we change that, right? Next is, which I think is a critical factor, is we change what's expected of them, right? If we do a lot of work with elementary schools. I know you guys do too, and which, by the way, is one of the reasons we manage a lot of our schools the way we do, is because we know we have such good relationships with elementary schools. We want to be very cautious of those relationships. But the public school system isn't what it could be, and even the private school systems aren't perhaps what they could be. And in many cases, we have the lowest common denominator philosophy, right? We just teach to the bottom to try to get everybody through the course, and that doesn't serve very well, right? So we change our expectations. We expect them to be focused. We expect them to have self-discipline. We expect them to be respectful, right? And that goes a long way. So number one is we interrupt their pattern, right? Second is, can you even read that at all? Is that
a little bit?
Kind of, sort of? Yeah, the no screen thing really is kind of. Is that better?
Yeah, a little under
A little bit?
pattern interrupt.
Yeah, pattern interrupt is number one. That'd probably be it, as much as you need. Second is we change their social environment, right? So number one, we change their physical environment. Number two is we change their social group, their peer group, right? And again, that's not just the classroom, but it's a big piece of it. I always think of the example like this. I mean, we've all been in traditional classes before, right? And we're all doing front kicks to the front of the class. And on the left, and maybe I'm a blue belt or something, and on my left side I have a gold belt, and on my right side I have a brown belt, right? Well, think about how productive that environment is, right? Because I'm doing my front kicks, and I'm kind of like pushing myself a little bit because I want to look good for the green belts, right? And I'm also like trying to keep up with the brown belts, you know? So that social engineering is pretty important, right? So they have that dichotomy. They have trying to set a good example because we all kind of want to be looked up to, and then trying to catch up simultaneously, right? I think they're pretty powerful factors. The next key is that, so does that make sense? Did you get that? I didn't mean to flip too fast. Are you okay? One more second? Yeah. Yes. Okay, okay, sorry. Just visualize that classroom. Visualize doing those front kicks, and you've got, this guy over here that you're not going to let him kick higher than you, and this guy over here you're trying to catch up to him. Is that better?
Yes.
Good. Okay, good. So then next, I think number 3 is that you have this instructor, right? You have, and he serves a couple of purposes. I'm only going to focus on one for right now, but you have this competent guide, this kind of mentor figure. Right? And one of the core functions of the mentor figure is to keep you from creating bad habits, right? I mean that's a key to high performance, is not getting stuck in bad behaviors, right? I mean, if you look at professional athletes at any level, right, one of the key functions of the team and the key functions of the coach is to keep them from creating bad habits. Once those bad habits once they become habits, now they take a long time to deprogram, right? So if we can catch them early, we're much better off. And then secondarily, I think it's important that they dramatically help us shorten our learning curve, right? How difficult would it be to learn, I don't know, anything about martial arts if you had to go learn it just from like YouTube videos or something, right? I mean, you can do that, but without somebody kind of looking over your shoulder and helping you through those challenges, keeping you from making mistakes, the learning curve will be much, much, much longer, right? Okay, and then third is it's like having a blueprint. And not only is it a blueprint, but it's like an inspirational blueprint, right? The instructor fires the side kick out, and the uniform snaps, and its foot position is perfect, and hip is rotated, and it looks the way you want it. You have an instant visual image of what that thing should look like, right? So now you have the ability to know what it looks like the right way, instead of having to sort through 100 YouTube videos of people doing it wrong, and then create those habits, right? So I think that's a big example. And then number 4 is mirrors. And I don't mean just physically mirrors on the side of the wall, although that's a useful tool. What do mirrors really do for us? I mean, somebody answer me. Why are mirrors important?
They give you feedback.
Yeah, you have instant feedback on what's going on. So you just saw the instructor fire that side kick out there, and his foot looks like this, right? And then now you did it like this. It doesn't look the same, right? And you have that sort of instant feedback, that instant performance analysis, dispassionately, right? Now it depends on how dispassionate you can be, but the mirror doesn't lie. It shows you exactly what you did. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So, okay, good. So the one habit that I talk to all of our folks, that I really work with all of our coaching folks on, is there's a great book. I like to read a lot, so if anybody's into that. But Jim Collins, Jim Collins, right? He wrote Built to Last and Good to Great. In the book Good to Great, he talks about, in Built to Last, actually, in Built to Last, he talks about how CEOs and executives of these top-performing companies have a habit of staring the hard facts dead in the face, regardless of what they will show. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of us, we fear that because our results are a direct proportion of our own efforts. So if our results aren't good, well, what does that mean about us? Right? So you've got to not fear that. That's such a critical factor. And that brings me to really what the point is, frankly, is most of our industry, right? We're in a very typical small business niche. I have another company called MasterYourSmallBusiness.com. where I work with small business owners of a bunch of different categories. I have about 55 different niches that I work with. Dance, cheer, gymnastics, swim, of course, very similar to martial arts. But I work with chiropractors and dentists and cosmetic surgeons and auto repair shop owners, and I have a lot of restaurants I work with for some weird reason, but I'm sorry. It says most of us forget that lesson immediately upon opening a martial arts school.
Get these lessons
Yeah.
instant.
The four things...
There's a gap, there's
It's like hiding around the corner.
Yeah.
So the four things we all learn earning our black belts, right? We all were products of those four keys we just talked about, right? We all had that positive social group of students next to us. We all had the competent mentor, the instructor. We all looked at our feedback every day in the mirror, right? So we all are earning our black belt is an accelerated process because, in my belief, because of those four factors. There are a few other factors I think too, but those four factors are critical factors in getting that done, right? You know, try to do it on YouTube and see how that turns out, and then compare the two, right? So, but I think the big challenge that we have in the industry is very typical of small business niches, by the way. We're not an exception at all. There are some things that we exception, but this isn't one of them. Most small business owners who open their business started off as technicians in their business, E-Myth, right? Gerber's E-Myth. And just because you're a good technician in the thing, number one, doesn't give you the skills to actually run the thing, right? It's the Peter Principle. It's a great book called The Peter Principle, right? It's about industries that promote strictly from within, primarily from within. So the interesting piece of it is that we learn this pattern of success. We learn this habit. We learn to set long-term goals, break those long-term goals down into intermediate goals, break them down into short-term goals, take daily action on those goals. We learn to measure our performance in the mirror. We learn to have someone watching us and collaborating with us, right? And keeping us from making bad mistakes and forming bad habits, right? We learn that skill. We create those habits of success and those successful behaviors. Then we go open a school and forget all that shit, right? We just throw it all out the window. We like forget that. We forget that those were the things that got us there, right? And it's not atypical at all. I can show you 100 different business models where exactly the same thing happens, right? So when Master Kim asked me the question, what's the one thing that I help the most with, that I think is the most valuable to our folks, it would be this. It would be that on the bottom of that yellow sheet of paper, I just have a little space back there. The back is for a session later today. If you want to go through that, I can do that too. But the bottom of the yellow sheet of paper, I think the most critical thing that I help all of our folks with, especially the peak performer group that I work with, especially the coaching guys that I work with on a one-on-one basis, of course my own schools too, but at a much deeper level, it's looking the hard facts in the face, doing it consistently, and then zapping the gaps, right? See, we're all martial artists, and what we love to do is kick and punch and learn new curriculum and learn new things, but we forget to focus on the basics, right? So these are the fundamental, there's 7 fundamental metrics that will tell you just about everything you need to know in your business, right? And if you can watch these 7 metrics on a daily basis, I mean like all the time, you should always be in touch with these things. If you can focus on these 7 metrics, then everything you're going to learn for the rest of the sessions, everything that you're going to go do back in your school, you can structure all that stuff to create dramatic change, right? But if you forget the 7 metrics and go focus on whatever you want to focus on, keep in mind your brain is programmed all wrong. We all are. Our brain is programmed to go love all the technical stuff. But I got to tell you, this is the sad reality. I think that I don't want you to think less of me after I say this, but this is the sad reality. Crappy martial artist with great marketing and sales skills beats great martial artist with crappy business skills, right? Every time and twice on Sunday, right? So it's the truth of our deal, right? Now what I'm trying to do is get a whole bunch of people that are great martial artists and fix their business skills, right? Not the other way around, because those guys are tougher to fix, right? So the 7 fundamental metrics, really simple. None of this is going to be new for you, but I hope that this will help you with some focus. Number 1 is, how many warm leads are we generating on a monthly basis? And a warm lead is somebody who takes a step toward you, right? So somebody who takes a proactive step. I've done a direct mail campaign. I got 7 phone calls. That's 7 warm leads, right? I had 4 people that walked in this month. That's 4 warm leads. Now, web opt-ins I do categorize separately because they're a little flakier, right? But a web opt-in, I put in a separate category, but as soon as I've talked to them or they've talked to me, they're now warm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because web leads are flakier, that's how it is. If you can convert 30% of web leads, you're good. So, number one, how many warm leads? And that's all that says at the bottom is just they've taken a step toward you. They've taken a proactive action, right? They've basically, at the bottom, they've raised their hand and said, hey, talk to me about this. How much are lessons? What does your thing do? How does it work, right? Second is, how many of those warm leads turn into intros? And we can argue about what the introductory process should look like, could look like, how it's different for adults than kids, things like that. But whatever your current process is right now, it doesn't matter. It's the numbers that we're going to talk about that matter. Does that make sense? So how many of those guys turn into warm leads? Intros. And that means they've shown up at your school for whatever your introductory experience might be, whatever that orchestrated experience that you have set up right now, whatever that is, okay? Make sense? So number 3 is, how many of those then enroll? So warm leads to intros to enrollments. Really simple. This is nothing earth-shattering, right? This is as basic can get. But an enrollment, in my definition, I'm sure it's very similar to yours, but an enrollment is they've made a down payment, they're on some kind of an agreement that they're actually a student. No. Not like a trial.
Okay, not what I was going to say. Not like a trial, 2-week, 5-week.
No.
They're in a program.
Yeah, I count them as intros.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is a guy who, because a trial guy, they're valuable, right? A trial guy, like if he drives down the street and sees the sign that says Pop Warner football this way, mom psychologically is thinking to herself, well, we're only doing 5 weeks here, let's go check it out and maybe we can fit it into it, right? But if they've just done a 12-month thing on an orientation program or something like that, and they made a down payment, they're more sticky. That's a real enrollment. They've actually made a committed decision to doing your thing, right? Okay, does that make sense? Easy, right? So they made some kind of a committed decision to doing your thing, paying you on some kind of a scale, and taking some course of instruction. And then 4th is a renewal or an upgrade. And I think this becomes a bit of a rabbit hole too, but this is where a student has been part of your program for a while. I don't, how long it is not relevant. But then you've done such a good job of delivering on your promises that they've chosen to move to a higher level of training one way or another, right? Some people use like a demonstration team. Some people use, our current structure is we have an orientation program and then we have a leadership program that sits on top. And our objective is to move, what was that?
How much?
What did he just say? What, sir? What?
Grandmaster said 5 more minutes.
Holy.
He started 15 minutes
Okay,
late.
you guys good?
Yeah.
Okay, can you go fast?
Yeah, we can.
Okay,
do it.
so renewals or upgrades, right? Either you're moving them up or you're extending them, one or the other. It depends on how your thing is set up, right? I prefer to have a higher level program for a lot of reasons. Okay, then 5 is retention or attrition, depending on how you want to measure it. Right? So what's the dropout rate per month divided by the active student count? Right? It gives you what that retention rate is. Total dropouts divided by active students gives you a retention rate. Right? And we'll talk about measurements in just a minute here. Okay? So warm leads, intros, enrollments, renewals, retention rate. And then 6 is average student value. Right? So what, on a monthly basis, total gross revenue divided by total student count. Right? So what's the total gross revenue? It's just average student value. Monthly average student value. So total gross divided by student count, right? 10,000 a month, 100 students, every student's worth $100 a month, right?
You said total students per...
Gross divided by student count. Total gross. Now for you guys, and I'm going to assume a lot are doing after school, I factor out after school.
It's a separate animal.
Separate. And I usually factor out kickboxing too, because that tends to be artificially low revenue. So again, my frame is I'm mostly working with just the traditional program, right? After school, I love the business model. The revenue is typically a multiple of what we're going to talk about here, right? Kickboxing tends to be a fraction of what we're going to talk about here. So, right? Okay. And then the 7th metric, which I think is critically important to have in the metrics, in the numbers that you're looking at every day, in the belief system of operating a school, is what's the quality of the graduate? What are the physical qualities of the student, right? See, I've never in my life ever believed that you can increase financial results by diminishing student quality. It's almost, in my experience, is the opposite. Now it has to be appropriate, right? It doesn't mean the white belts have to look like black belts, but the black belts sure as hell better look like black belts, right?
Yeah.
So it's got to be in an appropriate time, but the numbers I run, the higher we can push quality standards, the better sales ratios get. Because the people we're trying to convince that we can do what we can do, see that we can do what we can do. You know what I'm saying? We don't have to be all that good at selling it if they can see it.
But just
Please.
to interrupt, just on
Please.
that specific point, what are you seeing in successful schools, the optimal relationship of staff to the student base? What should it be?
The number of
I think it's a
staff
pretty deep question.
to number of students. Is that what your question is?
I would say two things, and it's probably not going to be a direct answer. But in most locations, up to 300 students, I like to run them with 2 full-time people, program director, chief instructor. Now, they can have a bevy of instructors, but that doesn't mean that they're staff. You know what I'm saying?
Right, I'm just talking paid. Okay,
Up to 300, I like 2 people.
2 people paid.
Maybe a third little part-timer guy.
Got it.
But I like less people that are more qualified, that make a lot more money,
Yep.
that are engaged in everything, than to have like 100 part-timers. You know what I'm saying?
100%.
I mean, so it's a really, I mean, it's a deep question, right?
But
Maybe
also-
we should go to lunch or something and walk through that. But
Another factor of that is you're talking about just traditional students, not talking about after.
yeah, I'm not talking about after school. That's I would do that a whole separate staff.
It's a
I would
whole
do.
separate-
Yeah, I would.
Um,
Okay,
Thank
this
you.
is the important part. You guys ready?
Yep.
We got to go fast. This is the important part. Target ratio is about 80% from warm lead to intro. Okay, now again, these are relatively qualified warm leads, right? They're not just web leads. These are people who bothered to call you or who bothered to converse with you while you're on the telephone, right? So my kind of target objective here between warm lead and intro is I want about an 80% conversion ratio. This is what you need to be watching every day. These are the ratios that will guide how you implement everything you learn, right? This is how you accelerate one of these businesses very quickly, right? So I'm going to go fast. It's 80, 80, 80, 5% or better. You good?
80.
80, 80, 80, 5% or better. Make sense? So from warm lead to intro, I like to see about an 80% conversion ratio. From intro to enrollment, I like to see about an 80% enrollment ratio. From enrollment to renewal, which here, by the way, is where most of the revenue is made, I like to see about an 80% renewal ratio, right? Which means I've done such a good job that 80% of my students are choosing to accelerate, choosing to move up their training rather than just stay where they are. And then a scale of retention rates or dropout rates, you can measure it either way, right? Would be 5% dropout per month is kind of like, for me, a floor. I mean, you have to be at least that good, right? Most schools are probably dropping out 10, 11, 12, 13% a month, right? Now, after school, the retention rate is amazing. They never go away, right?
Until they get to high school.
Yeah, exactly. So
And then
I
they-
would
then
say,
become staff.
yeah, right. 5 is a really attainable, really solid objective. A couple minutes? Yeah, good. And then anything over 8 or 9%, I think you're in crisis mode. Right? Anything under 5%, I think you're doing great. We've got, you know a bunch of the guys. We've got a bunch of guys, like in our inner circle group, that are doing like 2.25%, 2.5% a month. And again, in a traditional program, if you just think about what that means the average student is staying with you 30 months on average. On average. That's fantastic. If they're paying $200 a month times 30 months, every student's worth $6,000, right? Well, flip those numbers around. If you're dropping out 10% a month, that means your whole student base is turning around every 10 months. 200 a month times 10 months, it's the difference between 2,000 student and 6,000 student, right? I know that was fast, but everybody followed me, right? It's
Yes.
pretty simple math. Okay, so here's what I like to see. 80, 80, 80, 5% or better. Average student value, my minimum target for all of our members is at least $150 per month per student. Anybody in this room, you should be at least at $200 a month, right? So again, factor out after school
Yeah.
and factor out kickboxing. Just traditional. You should be around somewhere between 150 and 200 a month, on average, right? And we've got a lot of folks that we're working on right now where we're getting them up to about 300 a month by implementing some high-level coaching programs for some of their high-level students. So we've got one program called Leadership Elite. Here's how it works in like the Maha Karate system. We're enrolling students for $400 to enroll, $197 a month. There's a $249 model in some of the prime demographics too. And then we're renewing them to $359 a month leadership, typically within the first 3 or 4 months, right? And organization-wide, we're at 78.5% moving them to leadership at the $359 price point. So, to me, that hits you at a really solid $240 or $250 a month on average per student, right? Now we have this other Leadership Elite program on top of that. It's a $997 a month program. And right now we only have about 4% of the student base in that organization wide. And it's got to be the right school in order to pull that off, right? Like Tony can pull that off, right? Oh, you got a group like this. You've got a little group like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is like, I did this for about 8 years in my schools. There's a bunch of different models. We probably don't need to get into it, but this is small group of people, executives, upper level managers, corporate leaders, things like that, and high level experiential process, right? Okay, everybody good with that so far? And then the quality metric, everybody's going to have different measurements of what quality is, right?
Yeah.
So the only measurement I think that you really have to have is every black belt you tie on, you have to be proud of, right? This isn't about how do we water down our curriculum and make it easier. This is, in my experience, you're much better off having it, get all the business out of the way early in the relationship, and then all you have to worry about is making them great. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to worry about making the black belt test hard because, they might not renew and they might not pay us, and screw all that. If you have all the business out of the way ahead of time, now you want to make it rougher and tougher every year, Now there's a factor that we call the arithmetic progression concept, right? And you guys all know arithmetic progression is just a curve, right? It's a straight line curve. There's a given factor. So what we try to do every black belt exam is plan obsolescence for the previous generation. Does that make sense? So we have a 10-year plan, and each exam is about 20% harder. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So we create this out. You never want this. I believe, these are my beliefs. I don't think you ever want the graduating black belt class, the second degrees, to look back at the first degrees that just tested and say, man, they had it easy. I think you want the opposite. I think you want them to look back and go, God, I'm glad we didn't have to do all that, right? Because then you're continually moving that part of the program, part of the project forward. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? 80 to 85% or better. Now here's why that's so powerful. This is nothing new, right? This is as basic as it gets. But here's why it's so powerful and why it really works really well for my guys, for our coaching guys, is because every conversation that I have with them on the telephone always starts like this. Hey, Toby, I've been thinking about this kickboxing thing, I've been thinking about this website thing, and I've been thinking about, and I say, okay, stick a pin in that. Let's talk about your ratios. How's the intro to enrollment ratio? Oh, it's 40%. Okay, well, forget everything else. We need to fix that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because kickboxing, any other curriculum you can think of isn't going to do you any good in the intro to enrollment ratio. We've got to fix your sales processes. Does that make sense? So this gives you just this granular vision, just like looking in the mirror doing a side kick. You know exactly where you should focus your effort and your energy. Does that make sense? That clarity can solve all this stuff for you. But if you get too distracted by, all the bright shiny objects floating around in the world, we never work on, we're all human beings. I do the same thing, right? But if you can focus on, okay, here's my biggest deficiency. I'm only at 40% here, I'm at 30% here, I'm at 50% here. What can we do to maximize that, right? That's the deal. Does that make sense? Okay, I guess they're breaking. So thank you guys so much. I guess